Hi, I'm Lana Nasrallah and welcome to the Wellness at Work Cook-Along. Today we're going to be cooking pasta shells with chickpeas, tomatoes, and spinach. Let's take a look at some of our ingredients that we'll be using today. So we have our pasta shells and our chickpeas. The chickpeas are a starchy vegetable, but they're very high in fiber and they're very high in plant-based protein. We're going to be adding vegetables to our recipe today. We're actually going to be making a sauce from these whole peeled canned tomatoes, and we're actually going to be using this liquid that was in the canned tomatoes to cook off our pastas and to cook our chickpeas. We're going to be adding in spinach towards the end of our dish just to get in a vibrant green color, some vitamins from the spinach. And then our aromatics today, we have our onions, garlic, and some red pepper chili flakes. If you're really sensitive to heat, you can leave this out or just use a smaller amount than what was provided in the recipe. And we're going to be adding in some fresh herbs. You do have the options to use dried herbs. Today we're going to be using rosemary and parsley. We're going to be adding a little bit of some Parmesan cheese that will give us some of that saltiness without adding in too much salt during the cooking process today. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've already prepared my pan here, and I'm just going to turn on the heat to medium-high. And our cooking oil today that we're going to be using is olive oil, a very healthy fat. So just going to wait for this to kind of heat up a little bit. It is okay to go ahead and add your olive oil into your pot while it's a little bit cold. So I'm going to be adding in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So we're going to go ahead and let that heat up a little bit. If you don't have olive oil at home, you can use any kind of neutral oil. I like to recommend canola oil because it does have some heart health benefits. While that's heating up, let's grab our onion and garlic. I'm also going to bring along here our chili flakes. So the first thing we're going to be cooking off from the oil is our onion. So we have about half of a medium onion chopped. That's going to be roughly about 1 cup. Just going to add this in here. Starting to hear a small sizzle, so that's indicating that the oil has heated up. We don't really want to get any color on these onions. We don't want to brown them. We just want to make them a little bit translucent. Just cook them off. If you don't have to limit your sodium intake, you can add a little bit of salt here, and that will help kind of bring the extra water out of this onion. But I'm going to make this dish for you today with very little, maybe even no added sodium. So we can see our onions are cooking. Just going to give them a little bit of a stir to make sure it's all cooking evenly. Onions are a great way to add flavor to a lot of dishes. They're actually a non-starchy vegetable, so very little starches in them, making them a very low carbohydrate vegetable, and they actually are very low in calories. So our onion has, I would say it's gotten to a pretty translucent state. So now we're going to be adding in garlic. So I have here 3 cloves of garlic, and I just thinly slice them. If you don't like slicing the garlic, you can use a garlic press, and you can chop a garlic. But it's important to know that the more you process a garlic, so the more that you chop it up and get it into smaller pieces, the stronger the garlic is going to taste in your recipe. So same thing as the onions, we don't want to get the garlic colored, we don't want to brown it, we just want to cook it down and really pull out that great taste out of the garlic and get it into that oil. All right, our next step is to add in some red pepper chili flakes. So the recipe recommends anywhere around like half a teaspoon. I'm gonna add a little bit more just because I like my pasta to have a little bit of heat. So that's about what a half a teaspoon looks like. You can definitely use measuring spoons. Just gonna add a little bit more. All right, I'm gonna give this a stir here. And as that's cooking, I'm going to grab my rosemary sprig. So this is one rosemary sprig. I'm just going to throw it in there and toast it off a little bit in the oil. And as you're cooking this, you're really going to smell that rosemary. You do have the option to use dried herbs in place of any kind of fresh herb, especially if it's a hardy herb like rosemary. Other examples of hardy herbs are going to be oregano, thyme, basil. You can always substitute those out from fresh to dry. A rule of thumb is if the recipe calls for about 1 tablespoon of rosemary, you can use 1/3 of that for dried herbs. So if you're cooking this at home, you can really start to smell that rosemary and even the garlic and onion. So that indicates that we're ready to add in the chickpeas. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. So here we have our chickpeas. Again, chickpeas are a great source of plant-based protein, really high in fiber. So if you want to cook up a quick meal for yourself or for your family, these are great to keep in your pantry. They can give you that protein and that fiber that's recommended for you to get into each meal and even with your snacks too, without any really preparation. So I'm going to go ahead and add these in. We're just going to toss them around in the garlic and onions. We're using canned chickpeas here, so they really don't require that much additional cooking. All right, so I'm actually going to turn my heat down to right about a medium. And I'm going to go grab our tomatoes. All right, so we have our tomatoes here. Again, we're using whole peeled canned tomatoes. These are canned Roma tomatoes. And what I like to do is actually bring them over the pot and just break them apart. You can also do the clawing motion and break them in the bowl. So then in goes that rest of the juice from the canned tomatoes, and we're just going to go ahead and give this a stir. If you do not want to crush the tomatoes with your hand, you can always take your spoon. I recommend having a wooden spoon and just press it up against the wall of your pot here, and that can help with breaking it up. And then as it cooks, these tomatoes are definitely going to break apart some. So I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse, and we're going to add in next our pasta and water. Okay, so next we're going to add in our pasta shells. And when I was developing this recipe, I used a couple of different pastas, a lot of different short grain pastas. And I really like these pasta shells because you'll find at the end of the cooking process that some of these chickpeas may kind of nestle inside some of these shells. It reminds me of little oysters or clams or even mussels, and I'm a big fan of seafood. They have a lot of good health benefits. But as you can tell, that's not enough cooking liquid, so we're going to be adding in some water. And I'm actually going to crank that heat back up to a medium-high. Going to give this another stir. And this may take around 8 to 10 minutes to cook off. Whatever the package says for your pasta is probably how long of the cook time it needs. I like to make sure that the pot is going to come up to a boil, just to make sure that my water is heating. When it comes up to a boil, I'm going to turn it down to a simmer and actually put a lid on top of the pot. All right, I see a little bit of a boil here. And it's starting to go around, so I'm going to turn that down to right around a medium, and we're going to put the lid on here. So while this is cooking, I would recommend to come back and give your ingredients a stir, just to make sure nothing is burning at the bottom of the pot. But while that's cooking off, let's prep some of our other ingredients. All right, so over here, we just have the last, it's 3 ingredients of our recipe. We actually don't have to do anything with these spinach, but if you don't like some of the stems, you know, a piece like this, you can feel free to just chop it off. You can actually give your spinach a chop, but I like to leave them whole. The spinach is gonna really cook down. But we're gonna just go ahead and chop up our parsley really quickly. Take the stems out and just give that a nice chop there. And then we're going to shred our Parmesan cheese. Now you do not need to use a block Parmesan. You can use some that's already been pre-shredded. This is just what I had at home. Just gonna shred some of that cheese. Again, this is going to be really one of the few sources of salt in our recipe. The canned chickpeas and canned tomatoes definitely had some, but if you selected the kind that is low salt or no salt added or reduced sodium, you're probably not going to get in too much salt. So we needed right around anywhere from half of a cup to 1 cup for the recipe, and I think eyeballing that, that's pretty good. All right, and we've prepped all of our ingredients. So we're just gonna wait for our pasta to cook, and then we'll go back and add these 3 ingredients at the end and give our recipe a taste. So our pasta is almost done cooking, but before we go check it out, let's talk about some of the health benefits of this dish. Per serving, and the recipe makes about 4, you're only getting about 300 calories, so that's not pretty high. You're also getting 11 grams of plant-based protein. To put that in perspective, 1 egg has anywhere from 6 to 7 grams of protein, and we know that eggs are a really good source of protein. You're also gonna get right around 7 grams of fiber. A food that's a good source of fiber is gonna have right around 3 grams. A food that's a great source of fiber is gonna have 5. So that makes this dish a great source of fiber. Now let's take a deeper look at other nutrition this recipe offers by reviewing the nutrition facts label. We are getting in some fat, but that is mostly coming from olive oil, which is a healthy monounsaturated fat. Monounsaturated fats have a beneficial effect on your heart and general health, especially when used to replace sources of saturated fat and trans fat in the diet. This recipe does provide saturated fat from the Parmesan cheese, but it does so in small amounts. There is 0 cholesterol and very little sodium per serving. The total carbohydrate count per serving is 40 grams, which is right below 3 servings of carbohydrates. This recipe can fit into a meal plan where you are trying to avoid eating too many carbohydrates to keep your blood sugar levels or weight in check. Now, if you look at the lower portion of the nutrition facts label, you'll see that we are getting some amounts of calcium, iron, and potassium. This recipe is actually not a great source of calcium, but does provide some in small amounts. The chickpeas and spinach we cooked with both contain iron, and we are getting a good amount of iron in 1 serving. Though it's not listed on the label, tomatoes are a great source of vitamin C. Vitamin C will help you better absorb iron from foods, which is an added value of using tomatoes to build the hearty pasta sauce. The tomatoes also provide potassium. Potassium has heart health benefits like keeping blood pressure in check. Now let's go over to our pasta and see where it's at in the cooking process. I think it's right about done. All right, so let's take a look here. Yep, the pasta's done. And one of the things I love is just what we're seeing here. How that chickpea is nestled into that pasta shell. As your pasta cools off a little bit, when we take it off the heat, this sauce is gonna thicken up. It's also very hot, and we're not gonna eat this right now. We do want it to cool down for a few minutes. But now's our time to add in some of that spinach. So I have a little bit over 1 cup. The recipe calls for 1 cup, but you can definitely add in more. So we're gonna mix that in, and then we're just gonna add in the chopped up parsley and the Parmesan cheese as well. Gonna mix all of that together. And I would say your dish is done, or your food is done, when you get the the spinach wilted down to where you like it. And it's gonna wilt as you're stirring it in. So for me, that's where I like it. I'm gonna take it over to another workstation here. Just bring the pot on over. And I'm gonna grab a spoon. I'm gonna grab the olive oil too. I put that back in the pantry, but we're actually not done with it yet. All right, so I'm actually going to go ahead and plate it. But like I said, you can definitely give it some time to rest. You don't want to eat this while it's too hot. So about 3 nice spoonfuls there. Got the rosemary in this one, so I'm actually going to pull it off. Look at that, all those leaves kind of fell off, and it's within our dish here. So everyone's probably gonna have some rosemary leaves in there. Now, people are used to kind of putting Parmesan cheese on top of their pasta. You can definitely do that, but I want you guys to try something else. So we know olive oil is a really heart-healthy fat. It's a lot of good benefits from the olive oil because it's a monounsaturated fat. And I like to recommend for people to top off their foods with a little bit of oil. Just gonna add a lot of depth to the flavor. I don't think you need to worry about the calories because it's healthy calories and it's good quality nutrition, and that's what matters. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get a really small bite here because I know this is still piping hot. I'm gonna get some spinach in there as well. Very hot, but I got some of the olive oil. It really makes it taste very good. Well, I really hope that you guys enjoy cooking with me today. If you have any questions about this recipe, or if you're interested in healthy substitutions, please feel free to contact the Wellness at Work program. We can work through that together, and we can talk a little bit more about nutrition and healthy eating. Take care.